There's certainly no shortage of villains in the MCU. Well, they've probably experienced a dip in numbers following the decimation, but you know what we mean. Although these villains aren't lacking in power, many fans feel they're missing any sort of depth, which might make them compelling. Today, we're going to talk about Helmut Zemo, one of the most successful MCU villains, both in terms of character development and evil schemes perpetuated. As much as we love Marvel movies, we have to admit, there are a few weak points out there in the MCU. While there are some truly awesome villains out there, such as Loki and the Vulture, for the most part, the villains lack many of the same qualities which make the heroes so likable. Our Marvel heroes are far from perfect, and that's why we enjoy them so much. We like characters with some emotional depth, and sadly, many Marvel villains lack this. Hela was a big deal because she was Marvel's first real female villain, but even though she was undeniably badass, her character wasn't that intriguing. She wanted to conquer Asgard simply because she loved to conquer. We felt more emotions towards a literal pile of rocks than we did towards Hela. Okay, maybe it's not fair to stack up Hela to the hilarious Korg, but you get what we're trying to say. Helmut Zemo from Captain America Civil War didn't have his own giant wolf, and in fact, he didn't have any superpowers. All he had was a serious vendetta against the Avengers, and more than his fair share of cleverness, and look what he accomplished. Unlike most villains in the MCU, he actually finished what he set out to do by destroying the foundation of the Avengers. Helmut Zemo wasn't a guy who had superhuman powers, and he wasn't a plot device designed to be the polar opposite of a superhero. He was just a regular dude who liked to spend time with his family, and whose son has a fascination with the Avengers just like many other kids. But everything went wrong for Helmut Zemo when his family was killed by Ultron during the attack on Sokovia. Zemo resented the Avengers for their deaths, and was furious about the fact that they continued on as if nothing happened, while his whole life was turned upside down. As much as we love the Avengers, his anger towards them is completely understandable, and he wasn't overcome with delusions of grandeur, even admitting that he didn't have the strength to take on a single member of the Avengers on his own. Instead, he determined that manipulation would be his weapon of choice. It may not be as flashy as one made out of Uru metal, but it certainly got the job done. He framed Bucky Barnes for a bombing, which claimed the life of King T'Chaka, which further strained the relationship between Captain America and Iron Man that was already tense due to the Sokovia Accords. At the end of the movie, Zemo lives on, and it's clear he believes he's won. He fractured the formerly close relationship between Tony Stark and Steve Rogers, forcing the latter to perform his superhero duties underground. Protecting the world is an exceptionally difficult job, especially when you're alone. That's kind of why Nick Fury started the whole Avengers Initiative thing in the first place. We knew there were serious bad guys out there that only a team of heroes working together could take down. But it was one single man with a thirst for vengeance, lacking any superhuman powers, who ripped the Avengers apart. While we certainly don't applaud what Zemo did, we have to say he got a lot done despite the odds. In fact, we can't help but wonder if Avengers Infinity War would have turned out differently if it wasn't for the actions of Zemo during Civil War. It's not like Captain America, Black Widow, and Falcon just sat around and forgot how to be superheroes. But again, we know they work better as a team. Having to work on the down low most likely limited them in many ways, making them ultimately less effective than they could have become if they were allowed to train out in the open. And then there are the limited resources they probably had to deal with. Just look at how a single suit from Tony Stark changed the game for Peter Parker when he was working as a hero. While Happy Hogan was supervising the big move at the end of Spider-Man Homecoming, he mentions a prototype shield for Captain America. If he was able to work openly with Captain America, it's likely Tony could have created an even better shield, and Cap could have got some training with it, allowing him to work with it even better. We can't say for sure that this would have turned the tides of battle against Thanos, but it definitely wouldn't have hurt. Zemo was a successful villain who resonated with movie audiences, but he had some Marvel comic book fans pretty confused, mostly because he's absolutely nothing like the Helmut Zemo we know from the comic books. Some called the MCU Zemo a loose interpretation of the comic book version, but we think that's pretty generous. The Russo brothers claim they wanted to incorporate him into Civil War in a fresh and exciting way, and they definitely achieved that goal. We have to wonder if Zemo was left alive at the end of the movie for a reason, and if the comic books might hold some clues for what he could do if he ever gets out. To start with, Helmut Zemo bears the title Baron Zemo, and he's the second person in Marvel comic books to be called this. The first was his father, Heinrich Zemo. Unlike in the MCU, his father is presented as less of a doting grandfather and more of a fascist. Well, actually, he's definitely a fascist, and one who believes the Zemo line is genetically superior to all others. He raises his son, Helmut, with these values. Needless to say, his worldview put Heinrich Zemo at odds with Captain America, who likes nothing better than punching fascists square in the face. Heinrich started out as a loving husband and father in addition to being a brilliant scientist, but needless to say, things didn't stay that way for too long. Just to prove he could be a stereotypical evil villain, he set out to create a death ray which was soon destroyed by Captain America and Bucky Barnes. Enraged and forced to go into hiding in the aftermath, Heinrich was forced to start wearing a cowl to hide his identity, and this didn't help to improve his increasingly sour disposition. His next big project was called Adhesive X, which was supposed to be a permanent adhesive substance. It probably sounded much safer than making something called a death ray. Captain America once more showed up to save the day, and a vat of Adhesive X ended up getting spilled on Heinrich. The good news was that his invention worked, but the bad news was that it worked so well it fused his cowl to his face, permanently disfiguring him. Apparently, being a fascist carries a serious risk of facial disfigurement. We won't go over the entire history of Heinrich Zemo, but it's interesting to note that he once formed his own group of evildoers eager to take down the Avengers. He called them the Masters of Evil, but despite their admittedly awesome name, they failed in their mission. They tried to turn Thor against his friends and manipulate Wonder Man, but failed on both counts. Even Immortus couldn't help these guys get it right. Ultimately, in his quest to destroy the Avengers, Heinrich ended up battling against Captain America once again. He was still really focused on getting his death ray to work, and he did use it to destroy someone. Unfortunately for him, it was himself. It ricocheted off Captain America's shield, causing a landslide which buried him. You might think that this would have been a cautionary tale for his son Helmut Zemo, but sadly this wasn't the case. He was perhaps even more determined to take down Captain America than his father, and recreated his own version of the Masters of Evil. Like his father, he also started going by the name Baron Zemo. Also like his father, he was regularly pummeled by Captain America. Like father, like son, as they say. Desperate to make his dad proud, Helmut even went through no shortage of trouble to resurrect his father from the dead, but it turns out his father came back to life just to tell him that he still considered him a great disappointment. Ouch, that had to hurt. But don't feel too badly for Helmut. First of all, let us remind you he's still an evil fascist, and second of all, things are about to get weird. Really weird. They say we all hope to find a partner who reminds us of our parents. But Helmut took this way too far when he married a woman who claimed to be the reincarnation of Heinrich Zemo. Baroness Heike Zemo had some serious issues, aside from being a fascist, and the couple immediately set out to adopt as many kids as possible and managed to accumulate about 25 of them. Yeah, at this point, it's not hard to see why the Russo brothers thought it was a good idea to completely reinvent Helmut Zemo for the MCU. Maybe they wanted to make it clear that Captain America fights plenty of other people who aren't fascists, or maybe it was the fact that Helmut married who he thought was his dad, or it could have been that they didn't want any more competition from worst father in the universe, since Odin, Thanos, and Ego pretty much have that category covered. Oh yeah, those 25 kids Helmut and his wife adopted, they were pretty much brainwashed into following the same misguided beliefs as their parents before they were rescued by Captain America. Helmut may have succeeded in brainwashing a bunch of kids, but he found his fellow villains to be much more difficult targets. At one point in the comic books, the world was running precariously low on superheroes. The Avengers, X-Men, and Fantastic Four were presumably gone forever, and Helmut saw this as the perfect time to strike. He gathered his fellow villains together to form the Thunderbolts. It doesn't quite have the same ring to it as Masters of Evil, but it managed to fool everyone into thinking they were the good guys. The Thunderbolts were gifted all sorts of awesome new gadgets by people eager for them to stop criminals. Helmut wanted to use these resources to his advantage and take over the world, but his fellow villains had other plans. It turns out a lot of them really liked the whole superhero thing and didn't want to go back to their old ways. Eventually, they mutinied against Zemo, who got kicked out of the group he created. We'd say it wasn't his finest moment, but depressingly enough, it also wasn't his worst. This part of the comic book Zemo's past does make us wonder about the future of his character in the MCU. He was able to seize a considerable opportunity when there was an enormous vacuum of power in light of some missing superheroes, and what do you know? That's a similar situation to the one we find ourselves in during Endgame. After the decimation, we have to imagine the average citizen is pretty much living in constant terror. Even if they all follow Captain America's lead and get support, it's still a lot to deal with. If a group of new people claiming to be heroes showed up, would the average person resist, or would they be excited for even the illusion of increased security? It's safe to say that the public perception of superheroes took a huge hit after Civil War, thanks to the work of Helmut. But now things have changed. It'd be easy to spin the decimation into something that proves we need heroes. Many people have theorized that our heroes will encounter another enemy besides Thanos at some point during Avengers Endgame. Most people like to think big, naming majorly powerful villains such as Galactus and Annihilus, and it's easy to see why. Considering what a considerable foe Thanos was, it makes sense for fans to expect someone potentially bigger, better, and more powerful. But Helmut has proved that superpowers aren't everything. If he survived the decimation, who knows what he could accomplish in the wake of Infinity War? Many people believe it's only a matter of time before Helmut returns to the MCU, and this could be his chance. In the chaos surrounding the decimation, he could thrive. After all, we can't imagine he feels any more compassion toward the Avengers after Civil War. Maybe Helmut will decide to go bigger this time and not stop at simply tearing heroes apart. Maybe he'll be seeking world domination this time around. In fact, who knows what's left of the government agencies following the decimation? It's entirely possible that things could be more destabilized than we realize, and our heroes are going to be pretty busy trying to undo the decimation. It's clear that the MCU has never been in a more precarious position, and some might see this as an opportunity to perpetuate even greater evils. What do you think about Helmut Zemo as an MCU villain? Do you think he's one of the best around, or is he overrated? Do you think we'll get to see him again? Tell us what you think in the comments section below, and don't forget to subscribe to CBR for more MCU videos. Thanks for watching.